view that edits something about the month, okay? Like, do they start on Sundays or do they start on Mondays? That kind of view. You see what I mean? So it could segue to a different one. So you could have two different controls inside the month view that are segueing to different MVCs. So we need to know, we know which one it is by its identifier, okay? So once we've checked to see which one we're talking about here, and we always do that, even if there's only one segue, we always check the identifier just to make sure we're in sync with what we put in our storyboard. And because someday we might add another segue with a different identifier. Then the next thing we do is we're going to say, what MVC are we segueing to? Okay? Usually we are going to know what class of thing it is, or think we know, because we know the identifier of the segue. So it only makes sense. If you're a month view and you click on that day, that thing it's segueing to better be a day view controller, because you don't know what else to do if it's not, okay? But you still, even so, will usually do a segue destination view controller is kind of class, the view controller we expect. Then we'll make a little local variable with it. And then we're going to do VC, which is our little local variable, dot needed info equals. So that's kind of pseudocode for preparing that day view controller. So if this were the day view example, probably it would say do VC dot date equals some NS date, right? And so now we've prepared the day thing. And that's all we do here. Everything else happens by magic. Once we've prepared that new MVC, it goes on screen and does what it does. We don't have to do anything to make things slide or animate. That's all handled by the system. All the system is asking right here is please prepare this MVC to come on screen. Now, very important thing to understand here. When this is called, your outlets are not set in the destination MVC. Okay? So this is between awake from nib and view did load. This is very annoying. Okay? I wish this was different. I'm sure there must be a good reason why this is the way it is, but it's very annoying because it means that any information that you're passing, like the day, to the day view, it has to kind of hold on to it until all its outlets are set, and then in view did load, it can go update all its UI. Does that make sense what I just said? Right? So you're going to have properties that are going to have to hold on to the day, and then when view did load happens, then it can update the UI. And I'm going to show you in the demo kind of a way that we might do it that's somewhat boilerplate or somewhat kind of a, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say best practice, simple practice for doing that, for dealing with the fact that this gets called before view did load, okay, before your outlets are set. Okay. So it is possible to prevent a segue. I have a few other slides, by the way, that I'm not going over in lecture, but they're on what you downloaded, so you can kind of read through them and look at the documentation to figure it out. But I'm going to talk about a couple of segue things here. One is you can prevent a segue from happening by doing this should perform segue with identifier : sender : and that's exactly what it says. You return yes or no whether you want that segue to happen. Why would you not want this to happen? Let's say you have a button and you click on it and it normally segues, but for some reason it can't segue. Okay, maybe you don't have permission or it can't find the date or whatever. So instead you want to put up an alert that says could not, provide the information or whatever. You can't just have a target action from that button that puts up the alert. Okay, you need to prevent the segue from happening and put up the alert. And so you prevent the segue with this. And then you have target action from your button that puts up the alert. Okay, that obviously wouldn't want to put up the alert and segue, so they want to be mutually exclusive. But this is how you can prevent a segue. Okay, any questions before I dive into a demo to show you all this in action? All right, here we go. So what we're going to do here is we are going to go back to attributor, right? Instead of machismo, we're going to do this in attributor. All right, let's hide others here. So this is what attributor looks like, if you remember, hopefully from just 2 days ago. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a second MVC. And what this MVC is going to do is to analyze, it's going to analyze some text and say how many colored characters in there, how many outlined characters in there, et cetera. Right? So it's kind of a stat. It's going to give you statistics about some text. Now, I'm going to put this aside and do this new MVC completely independently. In other words, I'm not even going to think about this right now. I'm going to build the second MVC that does this thing, which is analyze text and give you a result. Then we'll use it. And I just want to do that to emphasize how we want MVCs to be independent. Okay? So let's design that MVC. We start by dragging out a view controller, just like this. Okay, we're going to create a new class for it. Okay, I'm going to call this thing, it's going to be a UI view controller. And I'm going to call it, let's call it text stats view controller. I think that's the name I use. Make sure I did it. Yeah. Text stats view controller. We could call it analyze text view controller or something like that. But I think text stats view controller, although it's a mouthful, is pretty descriptive. And so we're going to put it at the same top level there. We can, of course, group our view controllers too. Here's the code for our text stats view controller. You can see again, we've got this nice designated initializer, which we don't want, and we've got some view controller lifecycle. We don't want any of that. Okay. So this text stats view controller, it is essentially a reusable thing. It needs a public API. Okay? And just like we did when we designed the card matching game, and we try to come up with a public API first, so we can think of how our thing is going to be used, we're going to do the exact same thing here. So I'm going to go to the public interface of this. This is the public interface for text stats view controller. And I'm going to add a property, non-atomic strong, which is an NS attributed string, which is the text to analyze. Okay? So the way this MVC is going to work is you set it a text to analyze, which is an attributed string, and it's going to analyze it. Okay? That's it. That's what it does. Okay, that's its entire reason for being. Okay, but it's an entire MVC, so it's going to have the UI to do that, all that stuff to do that. So how are we going to implement something like this? Well, I'm going to start by thinking about how I want to react if I'm this MVC when people set my text to analyze. And obviously, if someone sets my text to analyze using set text to analyze, right, the public method. Obviously, I want to set my little variable here, but I'm also going to update my UI. Okay, so anytime someone sets the text to analyze, I'm going to update my UI. So I don't want to allow my UI to ever get out of sync with what is essentially my model. Okay, this is essentially the model for this MVC, is the text to analyze. So of course, we're going to want a nice update UI, very similar to how we had in the other one, and we'll do that in a minute. Okay. But there's another time here when I might want to update my UI, and that is in view will appear. And that's back to what we were talking about before, which is that if this text to analyze gets set when I'm not on screen, maybe before my outlets are set, okay, I want to come along when view will appear and make sure my UI is in sync. Okay? Because this update UI is obviously going to be talking to my view, and if my outlets aren't set, it won't do anything. Okay? So this is obviously going to get called in prepare for Segue in a moment, so that's why I'm doing this. But this is also kind of a generically good thing to update your UI there and update it here. Now you might argue, oh, what a waste. What if this is called and your outlets are set? You updated UI, and then you appeared, and you updated UI again. So one might argue that it's a good thing to do this. Okay, self.view.window is the window that your view is in. View is the top level view of your MVC. And if that's nil, then you're not on screen right now. So what this says is, if someone sets the text that I'm supposed to analyze and I'm on screen, then I better update my UI. Otherwise, I'll let view will appear do it for me. Because I'm not on screen, and I'm eventually going to come on screen. In fact, I'll never analyze my text unless I get put on screen. So it's kind of good performance, too, although analyzing text is going to be trivial. Okay? So this is kind of a common pattern, to have outlets that you set that, if you're on screen, will update. Otherwise, you wait and let view will appear do it. Okay? All right, so let's talk about update UI and how that's going to work. Well, let's build our view so we know what our UI is that we want to build here. So I'm going to make this really, really simple. So I'm just going to have a couple of labels here. I'm going to say 0 colorful characters. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing we did with the score in Machismo to change that with the printf thing. And then we'll also keep track of outlined characters. But you could imagine that this text analyzer would have a whole bunch of other lines where it would analyze other things that was in random attributed text. Okay? Font, bolds, how many italic, et cetera. But again, we're going to make this simple. So I need to update these two things with, by analyzing whatever my model, this model right here, contains in terms of attributed string. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do that in a way that shows off a little bit how we analyze attributed strings. Okay? I'm going to type this code in pretty quick because we're time constrained, obviously. But you should make sure you understand this code. It's very simple and straightforward, but it really requires that you understand attributed strings. So it's a little bit of a double check of your attributed string understanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a method called characters matching, or we'll just use this, characters with attribute, NS string attribute name. Okay? So what this is going to do is it's going to look in my text to analyze for any characters that have this attribute, like NS foreground color attribute or NS stroke width or something like that, and it's going to return a string that has all those characters glommed onto it. And then in my UI, I'll just specify how many of them there are by checking the length, okay, of that string. Now you might ask, why am I going to all the trouble to collect them up? And you'll see that later. Okay, so how would I collect this up? I'm doing it mostly because I want to show you how that would work. So I'm going to create a mutable attributed string to collect all this into. I'll call it characters. And let's make more space here on both sides. Okay, so I'm just going to say NS mutable attributed string alloc init. So here's an empty mutable string that I'm going to put the characters in and return. Okay, so in here I need to collect all this stuff. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to do a while loop that goes through and looks at every character. Okay, couldn't be simpler. So I'll say int index equals 0 while this index is less than the self text to analyze length. Oops, length. Then I'm going to collect the characters. Okay, too many square brackets there. Okay. So everyone understands this part so far, right? This part couldn't be simpler. So now let's go ahead and get the value of this attribute at this character. So that's value. And the value is an ID here because it could be a color, it could be a font, right? It could be an NS number. So this is where ID comes in handy dandy. So let's say self.text to analyze attribute colon attribute name at index effective range. Okay, so this effective range, remember I told you is going to return the range that this attribute is the same for, right? So if this attribute is there for 12 characters in a row, it's going to return this range 12 in a row. So I'm going to capture that range, and you'll see why I want that. Okay, so I better create a local variable here in this ranger. No, in this range. Ooh, hello, range. So this is just a local variable range for this struct, and I'm just going to pass a pointer to it so that it fills that struct out with the effective range. Okay, questions there? All right, so if the value is